And this time I want to talk about a monumental shift in the global balance of power that occurred just hours ago in the Middle East. And what I'd like to argue here is that the treaty signed yesterday in Saudi Arabia represents the definitive end of the American-led security architecture in the region. It is time to recognize that regional powers are no longer waiting for Washington to protect them. The way I'd like to proceed is, I'd first like to talk about the extraordinary mutual defense pact that was just formalized between Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Pakistan. Then I'd like to talk about the specific strategic goals these three nations set out to achieve by forming this bloc. And I'd like to describe how the ongoing regional war involving Iran fundamentally forced this realignment. And then I want to switch and talk about the immense military and economic capabilities this new trilateral alliance brings to the table, and why it changes the calculus for every single actor in the region. You want to keep in mind here that what I am going to be constantly doing is talking about the relationship between a state's fundamental need for survival and the strategies it adopts when its traditional great power patron fails to provide that. Security. Let's start with the facts of what just happened. Yesterday, on August 7th, Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, and Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif met and signed what is officially being called the Mecca Joint Defence Agreement. The central, defining provision of this treaty is a commitment to collective defense. The text explicitly stipulates that an armed attack against any one of the three countries will be regarded as an attack against them all. This is not merely a memorandum of understanding, and it is not just a joint military exercise. This is a formal, binding political pledge of mutual deterrence that mirrors the exact language of NATO's Article 5. It is the first trilateral mutual defense arrangement of its kind among these three Sunni Muslim majority nations, and it fundamentally rewrites the security map of West Asia. Now, the question you want to ask yourself is, why now? What were the goals that drove these three distinct nations to sign this unprecedented agreement? When you look at the geopolitical landscape since the regional war violently escalated in February 2026, the primary goal for Saudi Arabia has been basic infrastructural survival. Over the past several months, Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states have come under repeated devastating missile and drone attacks from Iranian-aligned proxy forces, specifically the Houthis in Yemen, who have also violently disrupted global shipping and energy shipments. The Saudis realize that relying exclusively on the United States for a security umbrella is a fundamentally flawed strategy in 2026. Washington is currently paralyzed by its own munitions shortages and is deeply entangled in its own multi-front crises. The Americans simply failed to deter the attacks on Gulf oil facilities. Therefore, Riyadh's goal was to aggressively diversify its defense partnerships and build a sustainable, self-reliant collective deterrence framework. For Pakistan and Turkey, the goals are equally rooted in realist calculations. Pakistan, which signed an initial bilateral defense pact with the Saudis back in September 2025, seeks to solidify its economic lifeline with the Gulf while projecting its immense military relevance outward. Turkey, despite being a NATO member, has its own ambitions for regional leadership and sees this as an unparalleled opportunity to export its rapidly advancing defense technology, while simultaneously anchoring itself to the financial powerhouse of the Arab world. So, the overarching goal for all three states was to construct a robust, independent security architecture capable of deterring aggression without having to beg the West for interceptor missiles or diplomatic permission. Now, what I'd like to do is frame this discussion by analyzing the sheer strategic weight of this new alliance. When you evaluate military strategies and geopolitical blocs, you have to look at the tangible assets each state brings to the table. And the reason this Mecca Joint Defense Agreement is sending shockwaves through global capitals is because the combination of these three specific countries is extraordinarily complementary. They are not competing in their capabilities. They are completing a highly sophisticated military-industrial puzzle. If you look at this new strategic triangle, It combines Saudi Arabia's virtually limitless financial power, Turkey's advanced NATO standard defense industry, and Pakistan's massive military manpower and nuclear capability. Let us break that down. First, you have Saudi Arabia. The kingdom is the Gulf's leading military power in terms of sheer purchasing capability and is one of the world's largest oil exporters. They provide the capital necessary to sustain a protracted conflict and fund massive defense industrial projects. However, their vulnerability has historically been a lack of domestic manufacturing and a reliance on foreign troops. Second, you introduce Turkey. Turkey possesses NATO's second-largest military, but more importantly, it has spent the last decade building a formidable, independent defense industry. They are producing world-class unmanned aerial vehicles, the drones that have reshaped modern warfare, as well as advanced naval vessels and precision munitions. Turkey provides the technological edge and the hardware that the Saudis desperately need to bypass American export restrictions. And finally, you have Pakistan. Pakistan is the world's only nuclear-armed Muslim-majority country. It has a massive, highly trained standing army that has been forged in decades of intense border conflicts and internal security operations. Pakistan has historically provided training and technical assistance to Saudi forces, and by mid-2026, they had already deployed thousands of troops, along with air defense systems, to the kingdom. Pakistan provides the ultimate strategic deterrent and the raw, disciplined manpower that neither Turkey nor Saudi Arabia possesses in such abundance. When you fuse Saudi capital, Turkish military technology, and Pakistani nuclear and conventional mass into a single mutual defense treaty, you have essentially created an Islamic NATO. You have created a self-sustaining security bloc that can finance, equip, and fight a major regional war entirely on its own terms. This is exactly why the failure of previous American strategies in the region has proven so costly for Washington. For decades, the United States maintained hegemony in the Gulf by ensuring that regional powers remained fragmented and entirely dependent on American weapons, American intelligence, and American security guarantees. The United States operated as the indispensable offshore balancer. But as the 2026 conflict exposed the severe limitations of American air defense and the unreliability of American political commitments, these states made a highly rational, realist decision. They decided to pool their resources. The Mecca Agreement officially formalizes closer coordination, broader defense collaboration, joint security planning, and the enhancement of their collective defense industries. They are building the infrastructure to secure themselves, which inherently diminishes American leverage in the Middle East to its lowest point since the Cold War. And that brings me to the geopolitical implications of this treaty and how the primary adversary in the region is reacting to it. You have to remember that this agreement was signed against the backdrop of a massive, multi-front war involving Iran and its proxies. While the signatories publicly stated that the Mecca Joint Defence Agreement is purely defensive, not tied to an arms race and not directed at any specific nation, the reality of international relations tells a different story. The pact was explicitly designed to create a powerful, Sunni-dominated security grouping to balance against the Shia-dominated Iranian axis. Iran's reaction to this treaty highlights exactly how significantly the balance of power has shifted. In Tehran, Iranian lawmakers and officials immediately lashed out. They publicly criticized the deal, arguing that a paper agreement with Turkey and Pakistan will not bring Saudi Arabia true security. Iranian officials mockingly suggested that the Saudis should change their regional policies rather than begging for security from other nations, comparing it to Riyadh's historically one-sided relationship with the Americans. But this rhetoric masks a deep strategic anxiety in Tehran. For years, Iran's grand strategy has relied on asymmetric warfare, using expendable proxy militias and cheap drones to bleed its wealthier but more fragile Arab neighbors. Iran thrived in a fractured security environment where it could isolate its enemies one by one. Now, Iran faces a terrifying strategic reality. If an Iranian-backed militia launches a significant strike on a Saudi oil refinery tomorrow, Tehran must now calculate whether that strike will legally trigger a military response from Ankara and Islamabad. Will it trigger a retaliatory strike using Turkish drones, piloted by Pakistani operators, funded by Saudi wealth? The principle of collective defense entirely disrupts Iran's asymmetric advantage. It forces Tehran to reckon with the combined weight of three major regional powers, one of which possesses a nuclear arsenal. This is the very definition of deterrence. By raising the potential cost of an attack to an unacceptable level, the Mecca Agreement fundamentally limits Iran's freedom of action in the Persian Gulf. To conclude, if you step back and look at the totality of this historic event, the signing of the Mecca Joint Defense Agreement is a major milestone in reshaping the post-American security order. The United States failed to achieve its goal of maintaining absolute regional stability through its naval and air power. In the vacuum left by that failure, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Pakistan have acted as rational realists. They have forged a binding trilateral alliance that combines immense capital, cutting-edge military technology, and massive manpower. While this treaty lacks the integrated permanent military headquarters of a mature alliance like NATO, it lays the absolute groundwork for one. The era of Gulf states relying exclusively on Washington for their survival has officially ended. We are witnessing the birth of a deeply capable, regionally driven security architecture. And the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East will never be the same.